So welcome back. One of the scariest things about psychosis is the way that people's difficult and extreme experiences often seem to have a life of their own. And the more people want them to go away or try to make them go away, often the worse they get. And I think that's one reason why people so often blame the problem they're having with their experience on lively and dangerous spirits or demons or external enemies of various kinds. So one of the things I'll be talking about in this video is how attempts to control psychotic experiences not infrequently backfire and lead people into vicious circles where the psychosis just intensifies. And then I'll look at how normalizing can be a key part of transforming those reactions so that people can get into the opposite of a vicious circle, into what's been called a virtuous circle, which then can lead into recovery. And I'm also going to try to set all that in context by getting you to also think about how many people may manage to normalize by themselves and so that they handle psychotic experiences without ever getting into the mental health system. So let me start with that part of it. Many people can tell the story of having experiences that involve some degree of psychotic experiences, but then they blame the situation in some way. They might blame the fact that they were taking drugs, or they weren't sleeping enough, or they were under extreme stress and didn't have enough social support. And then they normalize it themselves and take care of what they give themselves what they needed so that the experience overall doesn't really become anything. An example from my personal experience is when I was in high school, there was a period of a few weeks where I smoked way too much marijuana, smoked from morning till night. And then I started having experiences. I had the experience where I started hearing people across the room saying things that it turned out they clearly weren't saying. And this didn't lead to trouble, though, as I hid it from everyone else while coming up with a normalizing explanation for myself, which was that the excess marijuana smoking was to blame. And so I quit smoking so much, and the problem gradually went away. Now, this kind of thing is likely common. There's studies that find this kind of experience pretty common in the population. One study said they thought maybe it's 10 times more people have psychotic experiences than whoever come into treatment for them. It's when the problems get more intense and people fail to come up with their own way of normalizing the situation and figuring out what they need to do to take care of themselves. That's when we end up seeing people in treatment. So I think the vicious circle, virtuous circle model can really help you understand the power of normalizing. Here's an example to start with about how a common vicious circle can get going. So let's say the person has some stress in their life, and then it turns out, and the research shows it's not that uncommon in reaction to a really stressful situation. People will start hearing a voice. But then here's something really key. If the person sees the voice itself as a threat, like, oh my gosh, now I'm hearing voices, this is terrible. Well, now what's likely to happen is the person's going to have increased negative emotional arousal, hypervigilance, listening harder for more voices, which of course is going to lead to more stress and lead to hearing more voices, which then will seem even more of a threat. So that vicious circle can just get really bad. So normalizing kind of like fights this tendency. Just changing to a more normalizing interpretation can make a huge difference in how things work out and set off a virtuous circle instead. So I can tell actually a story to go along with this slide because this is a story of something happened to a famous voice hearer when she was taking her final exams. It's written up in the newspaper. So she's sitting there studying for her final exams in college, undergraduate, and things were going okay, but she started hearing a voice, and the voice was saying things like, "You're no good. You're never going to succeed at this. You might as well give up now." So she just tried to kind of like ignore that and get on with her studies because she really wanted to study a lot. But within a little while, she was hearing like about 10 voices going at her, all with this really negative attitude. You're worthless, give up, you'll never succeed. But then the news story talked about how she responded to this experience. And what she did is she stood up and said, "You know, voices, you're right. I do need a break." And she gave herself a nice break, went back to her studies refreshed, went on to win highest honors on her final exams. And it's like she didn't like believe what the voices were saying, that she was no good and worthless. But what she did is she came up with an interpretation, which she interpreted the voice as an effect of stress and an information about aspects of herself. One information she got out of that is, gee, I tend to hear voices like this when I'm stressed. I need a break. And she actually was appreciative of having the experience of the voices, and they let her know she was stressed and she needed the break. So she accepted the voice as a useful signal of stress and took action that reduced the stress. And then with less stress, maybe not hearing the voices so much, she could get on with her studies. Now, it's interesting that in the past, before this, Eleanor had gone through a period of years of being extremely debilitated by voices, diagnosed with schizophrenia, having all kinds of problems. And, her full recovery involved a lot more than just coming up with normalizing explanations, but normalizing was an important part of it. I'll be talking more about her story and some of the key steps she took in recovery in a future module on trauma and psychosis. But we've talked quite a bit about normalizing now. And now it's really time, I think, for you to practice yourself coming up with normalizing ways of talking about things. So I'll give you a few ways to do that. One way is below this, there's going to be a case example provided. So I want you to kind of like read it over and then think of some normalizing explanations or ways of talking you might come up with that you would use in talking with a person who is having those experiences. And then when you're done doing that, you can share your ideas in the comment area. Also, if you have a colleague who's willing, you could have them role play a person with psychosis while you practice helping them make sense of their experience in a normalizing way. That kind of thing can be really useful for practice. And then, of course, when you're ready, you can start using these ideas we've been talking about in your conversations now with people who are experiencing psychosis. Whatever kind of practice you get, please consider sharing your observations and questions in the comment area. I think we're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and thanks.